I'm Adam. Being a Christian is sort of one of the deepest and biggest parts of my identity. I have been absolutely captured and amazed by the vision of humanity that Jesus presents in the Bible and the vision of justice and right relationships that he presents for community. And as a result of that, I got really stuck into a bunch of communities during university and in trying to pursue that. And the way that played out for me is because my dad was a sort of computer scientist, mathematician. He would always take me to lots and lots of science museums and places like that growing up, and we would play chess together. And we would watch TV shows in the UK called Bang Goes the Theory, which I watched growing up a lot. And then all of my friends would say, we watched The Big Bang Theory. And then I thought, I watched Big Bang Theory as well. And I realized it's very, very different. I watched the science show and one's like a... so I really like science. I watched Bang Goes the Theory growing up. And that meant that when I went to university to study biochemistry, I absolutely loved it. And I really got stuck into how I could use science to solve really, really big problems in the world. And for me, I got really excited by the potential of innovation and the way you can build new technologies to advance God's kingdom. And the journey that that's taken me on is, over the last few years, building a startup that's was trying to predict how evolution works to tackle the big problem of drug-resistant bacteria. That is a Silicon Valley-based startup. So for all the people who just heard about the wonders of Silicon Valley, that's where I operate. I operate in the world of Silicon Valley, and being a Christian in that place and trying to build more of God's kingdom through that. Awesome, that's a little bit about me. And so I want to start the talk by asking, what does the kingdom of God look like? Because there's a passage in the Bible where John's disciples, John instructs his disciples to come to Jesus and to ask Jesus, like, how do we know that you are the Messiah? How do we know that you are about to announce the kingdom of God and that the kingdom of God is arriving? And Jesus gives a very, very clear answer to that that's recorded in at least 3 of the 4 Gospels. And that is, the blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. I think there are probably 2 meanings to this. I imagine Jesus meant this in the sense of being able to see the kingdom of heaven and walk with him and be cleansed of sin. I imagine there's lots of dual meaning, but it also feels very consistent with everything else that Jesus did and said, that he also means this very literally, that the announcement of the kingdom of God is a world in which we heal blindness. People who are lame can walk, and like we heal leprosy, we give hearing to deaf people, and maybe we can even, well, let's not go there that. And so the point is that I think healthcare innovation brings about the kingdom of God in a very, very real and practical way for many, many people. And I was going to, where we're going to land is a bit of a discussion on pandemic preparedness, how we can prepare for that. But in setting this up, I realized that I kind of wanted to give a slightly higher framework for everyone about how to think about so the ways I think about, gosh, we think that healthcare innovation is amazing and really important for bringing about God's kingdom. How do we do that? And where can we advance that? And what can I play in that? And that's why I sort of wanted to know roughly what people are thinking about in terms of the work they do on a day-to-day basis in the room, because I think there's lots of ways that we can bring about healthcare innovation. So the roadmap of this talk, where we're going, is I'm going to talk about a bit of a framework for what problems I think exist in health, then a framework for how can you go about solving those problems, where can you dive into tackling them, and I'm going to try and present some like really what's at the frontier of thinking about how to solve these problems, and then I'll do a few deep dives into a few of the problems, one of which will be pandemic preparedness. There's going to be 3 of them, and different ways of solving them. And so just to sort of set expectations, I'm going to give sort of relatively high-level overviews of a few different fields and a few really practical ways that you can, if you are excited about the vision of the world that particular innovation brings about and you want to explore it more, I'll give some pointers for ways you can explore that. And I'm also going to try and persuade you that these areas I'm going to talk about more are really impactful things that you could work on and why you should work on them. Sweet. Healthcare innovation. Here's my roadmap. I'm going to try and map every disease onto one slide ever. So I kind of think that there are roughly five buckets of disease plus one that I can't quite fit in. And the first one is nutritional. There's 2 types of nutritional. There's overnutrition and undernutrition. Both of these are actually really, really big in the world right now. Many people do not have enough food, and many people have way too much food. The next bracket of diseases that I can think of is genetic diseases. Things that's in this bracket are some cancers are pretty much entirely genetic, and the classic one here is sickle cell as well. And then there's infectious diseases. You can split this in a few different ways. You can split it sort of by the type of organism that cause it, so bacteria, virus, or fungi. You can also, within that, there's a subset of those within bacteria called drug-resistant bacteria, which I will talk about more in a moment. And within all of them, but particularly viruses, there's what we would call pathogens with pandemic potential. And within that, there's a particular subset called engineered pathogens, which I'm going to focus on quite a bit, and then a set of pathogens that are called mirror life, which is to do with the fact that all the building blocks of life, all of the Lego bricks right now for life have a particular shape, and there is the increasing ability with chemistry to build Lego bricks that have a sort of slightly different, a somewhat good analogy is a slightly different sort of format. So currently if you buy Lego and you sort of click Lego together, it all works. Sometimes you can buy the fake Lego, which has a different kind of ways of clicking together. And previously in chemistry, we couldn't build different ways of clicking together into life, and now we can. And that's very bad because it means that basically none of our defenses would work against it. Next set of bucket is I then put a bunch of diseases into the bucket of called diseases of aging. So this is things like heart disease, cancer, dementia, and some autoimmunity diseases would probably also fit into this as well. I'll explain why I think they can all sit in that bucket in a bit, and I'll also have mental health, which is a huge problem. And of course, things like depression and anxiety fit into this. Those are my 5 buckets. The plus one is poisons, because there's like some things which like a nerve agent directly cause a disease and it doesn't really fit into them, but also a bunch of poisons just contribute to all of the other ones as well. Gosh, that's a lot. How can you go about tackling these problems? I have 3 roughly high-level things that I think are ways you can go about tackling these. Oh, wait, no, first. Biology is really complex, of course, so I appreciate that these are all kind of linked. So, overnutrition increases the risk of heart disease and cancer, and infectious diseases can also lead to autoimmunity, and like mental health obviously massively impacts nutritional diseases as well. How you can tackle these problems. I think that there's an amazing ability of innovation to bring more of God's kingdom. And so my first bucket is building those radically transformative technologies that are civilizationally important to enhancing God's kingdom. And I think I would argue I've put in vaccines in this bucket. Antibiotics are definitely one of them. Clean water absolutely transformed. the amount of infectious disease in the world. The other bucket is get into everyone, radically transformative technologies that are civilization important, that already exist. Not everyone has clean water, and not everyone has vaccines. And this is heartbreaking, and there is the number of lives that could be saved by just getting the ones that already exist out there is, I haven't got a good number for that, so I'm not going to say it, but it's big. And then the last one is designing systems that enable either of these two. Both of these two things can happen really, really slowly, and that's really frustrating, and designing the systems that can speed them up is a wonderful thing to do that many of you working in policy might be working on. Fab, is everyone following so far? Yeah. Fantastic. In that case, then roughly sort of different ways of working these problems. I'm not going to do it in the talk, but I have a bunch of hot takes on all these different areas you can ask me about afterwards. And so maybe you think about, okay, I want to go about solving this problem, this set of diseases, by building something that's radically transformative. And so I'm going to go and work in the university research system and try and invent the cure for Crohn's disease, or I'm going to invent the cure for a particular disease. Maybe you also think pharma is a way that you do that, so you go and work in pharma. The other bucket is actually you're going to invent something and build a startup that builds one of those things. And I would also put some non-profit research organizations. You can build sort of non-profit research organizations. One of my mentors currently runs a non-profit startup that is doing things like this. The other really obvious way is to deploy them and go and be a doctor to people, or a nurse, or use and provide to people the many different technologies that have already been built. The other one that came in here is a non-profit as well. One of my favorite charities that's run by a Christian is called Charity Water. If you haven't heard of that charity and their story, I would really recommend finding it out. And then startups can also deploy things as well. Within the system organization, a really impactful area of research is called meta-science, which is the science of how we do science. There is a bunch of organizations that now think really intentionally about this. One in particular is called the Institute for Progress, of which the founder, Caleb Watney, is part of this community. He's a Christian. It's based in Washington, and they've published a bunch of research papers on how you can speed up the rate at which science is done. The other one is working in government, as I know a bunch of people in the audience do, on working out how we can speed up science. And again, nonprofits can fit in this kind of bucket as well, with think tanks and building communities as well. So a really big thing that speeds up a lot of science is community building. Fab. The three topics that I want to talk more about is drug-resistant bacteria, aging, and preventing pandemics, and specifically engineered pathogens. Fab. They will be expectations. High level, questions, do ask. So, drug-resistant bacteria are undermining modern medicine. And what that means is that bacteria that were once easily treatable are becoming more dangerous, and things that were once things like a cut, that you could simply cure with antibiotics, you can no longer do, because the bacteria themselves have developed resistance mechanisms to this. And one statistic that seems to sort of ground the scale of the problem is that more people die every year directly because of drug-resistant bacteria than malaria and AIDS combined. And that number is about 1.2 million with a confidence interval of about 500,000 either side, 95% confidence interval. And the way that, very importantly, this number is calculated based on the counterfactual in which the infection was not resistant. So it's not just died with a bacterial infection. That number, sort of died with a bacterial infection that was resistant, is about 5 million. The number that died directly because the bacteria was resistant is about 1.2 million. Geographically, I think it's really useful to point out where this is happening. This is the deaths attributable to drug-resistant bacteria / AMR, or antimicrobial resistance, in 2021. I put this graph up because it is a global problem. It's really important to highlight that it is the extent to which it is a problem around the world is really, really different, because the way in which we prescribe antibiotics around the world is really different. My company, my two co-founders are both Polish. In the course of my company, I'm British, and I know no one who was like in my immediate family who was prescribed an antibiotic. Both of my co-founders are Polish, and during the course of building our startup, which is about 4 years, both of them have been regularly prescribed antibiotics. And you'll notice that Poland is one of the countries that has a 18 to 21 per 100,000 mortality rate, and the UK does not. So as an example, like the way in which the medical healthcare system works massively impacts this problem. Russia's particularly bad because they have a bunch of people with TB in all of their prison populations, which is really heartbreaking. India has quite a bad problem because of the amount of, particularly in India, the challenge is that people have antibiotics that go into the wastewater, and then people drink from the wastewater, which means they have antibiotics in their diet quite a bit. And the antibiotics there are mainly from animal farming. And then the next slide is what it's going to be like in 2050, based on the current estimates of antibiotic usage. This is from a paper in The Lancet that I can, of course, share with you. And I mean, they've chosen the ranges to make the colours look bad, of course, but it basically gets good nowhere. Pretty much apart from the UK and apart from the Nordic countries, and this is because they actually have very specific policies around this. It's one of the few areas in the world where the UK has a world-leading public health policy on this. This number, the worldwide number of deaths every year in 2050, based on the current course of action, is 8 million per year. Which would make it the second leading cause of death, if you assume in constant death rates of other diseases, which is poor. But today that would place it the second leading cause of death. So the question is, what can we do? The sort of obvious place to start might be, well, the drugs are not working, so we need new drugs. So we should make new drugs. That would be really, really good. I'm going to show you how good it would be with a number, because the same figure estimated that if we could develop a new drug pipeline for a particular class of bacteria, we could prevent 11 million deaths by 2050. So this is cumulatively over the next 25 years. One of the really big challenges with that, though, is that current antibiotics cost pennies. Often they're cheaper than sugar. They're a commodity. Which means that if you go into the hospital, it's much easier to give you an antibiotic, in fact, than it is to even get you a diagnostic to work out whether the antibiotic will work. This means that if you develop a new antibiotic, you first often will have to be given, the doctors will give you the 1p antibiotic, then they'll give you the 10p antibiotic, then the sort of $1/£1 antibiotic, then the $5/£5 antibiotic, and the $10 and the $100. And then if you develop a new antibiotic, you can sort of see that unless you price it at a very low number, you're not going to get used. And at the same time, healthcare systems are like, oh, well, you've just developed a new antibiotic, and we think resistance is very low to it, and we don't want to use it because that will drive resistance. And so you have a product in which your unit cost is low and your unit sales number is low. And so your sort of total revenue size is very, very small. And if you're the boss of a drug company and your job is to make the pharma company look good, then choosing to invest money on developing an antibiotic rather than a cancer drug, which you can sell for $60,000 roughly, and a lot more people will use it, is a very bad idea. Fortunately, what this means though is that pretty much all antibiotic R&D, research and development, and then clinical trial work has to be done by non-profits. Don't lose hope. There's some amazing organizations. This is a non-profit startup called Fair Bio that has about 27 million from US government money. And they're using machine learning to do basically all of the early stages of drug discovery. And they do that all for free. And they pass that on to pharma companies. So non-profit startups. Deploy existing technologies. How can we use that to solve drug-resistant bacteria? Basically just, can we get clean water and sanitation and the existing antibiotics to people? That report actually estimates that if we could do that, we would save 92 million lives between now and 2050 by just rolling out, like, this is genuinely very, very simply rolling out, I mean, it's simple is a strong word there. There's very little innovation. It is improving access to the training, improving access to WASH, which is water and hygiene, water and sanitation and hygiene, and then also improving access to the antibiotics that we currently have, because there's because of the supply chains. And then the system change that you can do, there's a lot here because of that economic model. And so I'm going to put up a Netflix logo so you remember it. And so one of these is a subscription model, and this is where a country says, hey, we recognize that the unit sales of your antibiotic might be low, but we recognize the value of this to our society. And so what we're going to do is we're going to promise to pay you a fixed fee, drug company, government, we're going to promise to pay you a fixed fee every year in order to have unlimited access to your antibiotic. And in reality, we think we're probably going to use very little, but we're going to pay you a fixed fee. And the UK government is the only country in the world. Japan is going to follow, to the best of my knowledge, but the UK government is the only one in the world in which they set this up. They currently have 2 drug companies who they're promising to pay 20 million a year to for the next 10 years for new antibiotics. Unfortunately, for a global pharma company, 20 million a year is absolutely nothing and doesn't make much difference. But at least it's a start. Government funding, again, a bunch of governments fund the philanthropy, so this was entirely US government funding. Please give more funding to this research. And then, or you can do very clever things. The EU has a scheme, so clever policy people. The EU has a thing called the transfer exclusivity token. And this is a clever policy device where you say to a pharma company, we know that you can't make money on antibiotics, and we know that you're making money on your cancer drug. So if you bring a new antibiotic to market, we will give you a token that says you can extend the life of your cancer patent by 2 years, 2 or 3 years, in return for making the antibiotic. And that's sufficiently valuable because 2 years of sales on your best selling cancer drug, patented, is about 10 billion a year. And so that's sufficiently valuable to the pharma company that now they might develop an antibiotic solely to be able to get access to one of those tokens. So this is examples of systems level change that you can solve to use drug-resistant bacteria. Awesome. Questions on that at the end? Big grand challenge number 2, aging. Very briefly, in the next 4 minutes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain what I mean by this. I'm going to explain why it's a problem, why we can bucket diseases under this category, and then how we can solve it. And so, what do I mean by this? I just want to introduce the concepts of lifespan and health span. So in the past, our lifespans were very short, and our health spans were sort of probably relatively close to the lifespan, because you kind of died young, either giving childbirth or fighting a war, which is very bad. And then we did this, which was amazing. We stopped dying young, and we started to be able to, our healthcare system is amazing at keeping you alive for a very long time. But unfortunately, often that is in a state that is not healthy. And the concept of health span and sort of the goal of this technology transformation is to do this. The idea that we would be able to keep people as healthy as possible, as healthy as maybe like a 20 or 30-year-old is, for as long as their life. Why is this a problem? Cardiovascular deaths are about 19 to 20 million a year, cancer deaths are about 10 million a year, dementia deaths are about 2 million a year. They are the leading causes of deaths worldwide. And the NHS and pretty much all healthcare systems are at a breaking point. This is how much currently age brackets cost to the healthcare system. And this is heartbreaking, because often that means that the person who we're supporting with this funding is in a place which is isolating, often inside a hospital, away from family. It's a sort of heartbreaking position to be in. And to be able to enable them to live in community and with their people who they're close to, and to sort of equip them to have the agency and to flourish would be amazing. So why we can bucket disease in this category? I won't do the exercise because the answer is kind of obvious, but I know a professor who sort of teaches health epidemiology, and their favorite thing in sort of the first lecture series of the term is to say, hey, lecture holder students, what do you think is the biggest risk factor for heart disease? And everyone shuts up, smoking. It's not smoking. What's the biggest risk factor? Other people should hand up and say, being severely obese. It's not being severely obese. Aging is the largest infection risk factor for pretty much all of those diseases. You can see this this is the risk factor for heart disease, the colors. This is middle age, and as you get older, this is proportion with cardiovascular outcomes. The same is true for infectious diseases. This is a graph from the paper earlier on attributable and associated deaths from drug-resistant bacteria. One of the biggest things that happens with aging is the immune system just completely falls apart. There's an organ in your body called the thymus, which creates all of your sort of cells that make antibodies and things like that. That just disappears by about the age of 65. It completely breaks down. And does anyone know this fun statistic? If we cured all of cancer, how much would it extend lifespan? We end cancer tomorrow, how much does lifespan go up? Does anyone know the number for this? Do you want to guess? 120. 120? Goes to 120?
Does it increase by 1 year?
Given the way I framed the question, that's probably a good guess. The number is 4 years. If we cured all of cancer tomorrow, it would extend lifespan by 4 years. 4. And so to prevent some sort of brief evidence on this, there's the research for how health span and lifespan work shows that we can extend lifespan in every major model organism, all the way through from yeast, worm, flies, fish, mouse, dog, monkeys. And the important thing is that the biology is deeply conserved. So the particular biochemical pathways that we use to modulate this are conserved throughout all of these different model organisms. And those particular pathways are well mapped out. A particular one that I want to talk about is inside your cells, inside every single one of your cells is about 2 meters of DNA. And what your bodies do is it's able to package all of that into the tiny space that it fits in by wrapping it around little balls. It's Christmas, so you can kind of think of it as like the sort of sparkly ball chains that people have. We sort of scrunch it all up. This is the main thing that changes when your body produces gametes, so sperm and the egg. It completely resets that sort of the way that they're all linked together. The biggest sort of example of this as well is GLP-1 drugs, as are now a fantastic example of modulating one part of biology, and then that having wide-reaching effects on the whole of the organism. To double-click on those reprogramming factors that I talked about, how your sort of DNA is packaged, and to link back to the way I started with the blind being able to see. This is an example from some of the leading researchers in this field of biology, where what they did was they took a mouse and they cut the retina. So this is the retinal nerve of a mouse, and they've cut it here. And then what they've done is they've played around with the, they've turned on a set of genes that help to reset or reprogram the sort of way that the DNA is packaged around those little balls, and turned it on. And what we've observed is that you can see regrowth of the retinal nerve. And this is not something that happens in mammals normally. It does happen in other parts of biology. Different species can do it. And these people were able to show that we can regrow the retinal nerve having had it cut. And I wanted to sort of get somewhat into the details here to sort of, I suppose, try and convince you that the sort of proposal that we can extend human health span, and that is one, biologically plausible, and two, could have immense health benefits for society. Can talk more about that. Again, so how can you, using that framework, we can build in radically transformative technologies. There's companies who are working on this reprogramming in a sort of more clear way. Pretty much all of them try and deliver it to the body through gene therapy, and being able to do that really effectively is actually really, really challenging. And so one of the biggest challenges for this space is solving that. And then there's lots of people who work on machine learning or AI for biology. There's a bunch of companies who do this. Loyal in particular are quite cool because they're developing this kind of technology for dogs, because people love their dogs. Most of the people want dogs to live longer, and so they're developing that kind of research. At the same time, like exercise and healthy societies, we kind of already know this, and these are radically transformative technologies in many ways. And there's so much about the society which makes it very hard to be healthy in many, many ways. Oh, and this drug approval is complicated, and if you could make novel science institutions, that would be cool. I'm going to leave that there, and we can talk more about that later. Pandemics. Pandemics, what you all came for. Well, probably didn't come for it. But briefly, purpose of the next few minutes is to try and convince you that the likelihood of an engineered or a new pandemic is probably much higher than you think it is, and the scale of the risk is also much higher than you think it is. To do that, I'm going to focus on the idea of engineered pandemics. This is a figure from a policy article that maps out the number of actors with unilateral access to nuclear weapons, which is about in the order of 10. And the number of people with the access to the influenza virus, the 1918 influenza virus, via synthetic DNA. And this is true of all pandemic viruses. People have a number of individuals who have access to be able to produce the DNA of a virus that has an order of impact size of nuclear weapons is much higher than people with nuclear weapons. SARS-CoV-2 shut down the global economy, put back global development by years. It's hard to estimate the impact, but ranges put it in the tens of trillions, and of course the numbers estimated are in the sort of 40 to 50 million range. That was less than 1% lethal. If it was engineered, even just like 5 times that, you can imagine would be catastrophic. And one of the other emerging capabilities in this is we know that, so the Frontier AI Labs will assess the uplift in biology research capabilities that their models provide. So this is a set of graphs from about a month ago when Anthropic released their latest model on a set of biology benchmarks. And the sort of key thing to point out is that in many cases, the models perform as good as or better than like human experts in the field. So this is like a multiple choice quiz on designing biology research protocols. This is on designing how to insert DNA into other organisms. This is choosing what sequences to insert, and this is analyzing what figures do. And about a year ago, the models were about here. So there is a huge, one of the sort of challenges is that more people have access to the DNA, more people have access potentially to the knowledge to be able to engineer pandemics. The risk is increasing. What can we do about it? Here's a framework from that same paper. It's got it's got a nice acronym, so it's easy to remember, which is delay, detect, and defend. So the person who wrote this is a big proponent of basically stopping all research into like pandemic pathogens and saying like the steps that you would take to defend do not change in the face of the knowledge of what is pathogenic or not. The sort of steps are kind of universal across all of the different emerging pathogens, and so we shouldn't let people know what things are pathogenic, because that increased probability of like giving somebody who might do something malicious that material. Then there's a detection element and defensive element. Do a little bit more than detect, because somebody wrote a paper that I can share that says the 4 pillars of biodefense, and the first one is detection, and this is sort of worldwide sequencing of blood samples or sewage to try and detect DNA. The second one is PPE. There's a bunch of policy papers that have looked at how much it would cost to stockpile different levels of protective PPE, and it would cost something like the US about 10 billion to purchase this level of PPE, this exact one, in the sort of tens of billions. And then there's a thing called biohardening, which is the idea of creating pathogen-free environments. I will touch briefly on this one because we're in the UK. Talking about meta-science, there's an organization called ARIA, which is a sort of frontiers, big moonshot think tank, and they have a research program that's trying to develop a particular set of, essentially, I'll use it here, immune-boosting medicines that would sit in bucket 4 nicely. So again, 3 things. What radical new technologies can we build to prevent this? Next generation PP would be great if we can make it even cheaper. There's a bunch of new biosecurity startups that launched in the last month that are funded by some of the frontier AI labs, including OpenAI. They are called Valthos and Red Queen Bio. They're sort of a defensive measure against the AI models. Current gen PP is the thing that we can deploy now. If you can make an even more clear economic case for the amount of money to spend, or persuade insurance companies to do it, that would be amazing. And then system building. People like Grace are building amazing biosecurity communities. If you're in government and you can work out a way to persuade people to fund the PPE, that would be amazing. We've seen this slide, and I will just leave time for questions, and you can ask about these things in a moment, especially startup stuff. And summarize by saying, God's kingdom is one of human flourishing. I think healthcare innovation helps build that. The ways that we can contribute to that are by making the future radically better and building those technologies and deploying transformative technologies now. Things that sit in like radically better are aging, gene therapy, machine learning for biology, which is what the virtual cell thing is. And then transformative now, clean water, universal access to antibiotics and sanitation, and drug-resistant bacteria and biosecurity are underinvested because the risk is in the future. Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, so I redo the top rated one and then.
Okay.
Brian Johnson / Ray Kurzweil comes to longevity for a transhumanist perspective. How can Christians offer a different view on dignity in aging?
100%. Yes, Brian Johnson's an interesting one. If you don't know him, what did he, so that I can sort of answer the question better for everyone in the audience, for context building, he sort of is a person who built a tech company and then now is trying to sort of, in many positive ways, spread a sort of, here is good health and information, but the way he's trying to do that is through sort of movement building, and one of the things that I've heard him say is, my competitor is Jesus, because he wants to, the sort of philosophy or worldview that he tries to unify around is a sort of motto called don't die. I've chatted with Brian Johnson a few times. He is, in person, a really nice guy, for what it's worth. But I think the sort of, the thing that he completely misses is this idea that, I will start with, one of the ways that I approach this is I think that the Bible clearly states that our body is a temple, and like looking after it is a really, is something that we should aspire to do. I think that the sort of focus for Christians is around, can we like bring human flourishing and end, in many ways, end suffering and be the healer like Jesus was? But equally, we know that sort of, like, we're not doing it, like, none of that sort of work is because I want, you want to live forever, or because it's sort of, you want to become something that other people, or like transcend what it means to be human. It's about going, I really care about being the best human that I can be and honoring God and building more of God's kingdom. I can chat more with the person who asked that afterwards.
The next most popular is, why did you decide to build a startup so young instead of going into a job first to gain credibility?
Great question. Honestly, this is something I ask somewhat on a regular basis. Why did I do it? I'll tell the story. So I was really blessed to have a mentor when I was about 16 who sort of encouraged me to write down some of the things in work that I really wanted to, what I wanted to get out of work. And one of the things I wrote down was I love science, I want to think intentionally about impact, and I also like solving really hard problems. He had also set up an IT support company, and I'd sort of seen what he could do with that. And one of the things I loved doing with my dad was watching things like Dragon's Den. And so I think I had this love for science and desire to sort of build God's kingdom through it, and was aware of entrepreneurship. And then through that, just sort of got stuck into entrepreneurship societies and biotechnology societies at university. And just by sort of trying that and putting myself out there, the story of the startup was we ended up winning one of those competitions. We got some free lab space. It turns out that if you want to genetically engineer bacteria to try and do research, the companies that produce the reagents to do that won't just sell that to a bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds. Somewhat fortunately, maybe. But fortunately for us, creating a company in the UK costs about £15 and takes 3 hours. So we did that. And then we were able to buy the reagents. And then from there, it kind of snowballed a bit because our science idea kind of worked first time. And then we received some angel investment and some UK government money. And then we went to California and San Francisco and took part in an accelerator program there. So being really honest, part of it was just being a very fortunate, lucky series of events. Maybe God was in that. I think my opinion is, and I understand, is that I think there's so many ways God answers prayers through that. Part of it was getting really clear on what my identity and values are, and then what are the things I want out of work, and just by having that awareness, being able to spot those opportunities. The sort of the classic analogy of how many dogs were in the park. You sort of only start looking for dogs when you're asked how many dogs were in the park. So just being aware of the thing that you're looking for is really helpful. If I was to try and answer the question, I would say that one of the huge benefits of just sort of diving straight into starting a company and just sort of go in for it is because that's the best way to learn how to do it. You sort of throw yourself in the furnace, and as long as you surround yourself with lots of mentors, you learn really, really quickly because you're in the environment which you can learn really quickly. That's a very tough way to learn because it means that I make lots of high-stakes mistakes very regularly, which is really stressful. So I don't think it's right for, I just would be aware of that. And there are definitely lots of days where I think, why didn't I just go and learn from someone how taxes work, or how to project manage, or why didn't I go and learn from someone how to be harsh and accountable with people? One of the things I really struggle with as a leader is going to people and being like, this was not a good enough job, especially when I'm younger than them. There are lots of skills that I wish I had learned, which you don't really learn at university. Most of them are how to interact with people. Honestly, in lots of ways, people making mistakes and trying to do that gracefully as a Christian well, but then also being lawyers, you got the law wrong. Please pay me lots of money now, which is an odd thing to do. Yes, again, can chat more about that.
Any questions in the room?
Yeah.
Thank you, really brilliant. Very admirable, especially when I first asked you how old you are.
That's so kind. I was 25 last month.
Older than you. Okay, so only by a couple months. So I would really love to ask you about if you've ever considered, the story where, well, there's many stories where God says, your faith has healed you. This idea of the placebo pill, people think they've been healed. Actually, you can see the benefits of how the symptoms start to magically fly away. What's your thoughts on that, and kind of how does that kind of reality what does that mean for some of the stuff that you're doing?
Let me just play the question back. Yeah. The question is around, and for the audience, the question is around, one, the effect of placebo, and two, and also healing through prayer.
Well, yes and no, because I guess the placebo pill is prayer involved. It's kind of a man thinks, so he is kind of in a sense, and we've seen evidence of that actually working in a biological sense.
Definitely.
So I guess maybe a better question with a little bit more guardrails is, if that does work, what does that mean?
People should take pills that are red and bright more often and think they're real. The placebo effect is really real, and gosh, the brain is wonderfully complex and wild. And there's also just related to that, there's a huge amount of amazing research around the benefits of creating spaces where people feel valued and looked after, and the change of environment, and lots of places which sort of offer. There's this whole area of slightly dubious area of healing in sort of mystical ways, and they often seem to do quite well. And a large part of that is the placebo effect and the nocebo effect. Placebo effect is real. Maybe people should utilize it more. Medicine also has amazing ways to work out when a medicine actually has an effect, and it's not the placebo. Prayer is something we should always do, and God heals in miraculous and amazing ways, and that is complementary to and synergistic with medical innovation. And prayer in the midst of real medical suffering and hardship is an amazing source of strength and firm foundation, and some of the most amazing people who I look up to have incredible prayer lives in the face of immense suffering.
I've let time run away. We have 3 minutes until the
3
keynote
minutes.
in there. But can you just say thanks to Adam?
Thank you.